Welcome back to Nick's Scary Stories. Tonight, we're venturing into one of the oldest neighborhoods in Detroit, where history isn't just remembered, it's still moving. Or in this case, reversing. Our first tale comes from Leland Street, where a single quiet home has a timepiece that defies all logic, and one young man who found out the hard way what happens when you follow time backward. Stay tuned. You're not going to forget this one. When my dad passed away last fall, I inherited a house I didn't know existed. He never mentioned it, never drove me by it, never even hinted there was an old property in his name. But there it was, buried in the will, 1216 Leland Street, Detroit, Michigan. Deed enclosed. Signed and dated 1986. I thought it had to be a mistake. My dad was a truck mechanic, not a landlord. But the address was real. When I drove out to see it, I expected a condemned mess, maybe a burnt shell or an empty lot. Instead, I found a perfectly preserved colonial nestled between two crumbling townhomes. The brick was clean. The yard was cut. The windows were intact. And the strangest part? The front door was unlocked. Not just unlocked, slightly open, like it had been waiting. I stepped inside. It smelled like cedar and old books. Dusty, sure, but not abandoned. Someone had been taking care of it. Furniture was covered with sheets, but everything was in place. No graffiti. No signs of squatters. And on the mantel above the fireplace was an old pendulum clock. It was the only thing not covered. The clock ticked. Loudly. Precisely. But the second hand moved backward. I watched it for a full minute. It ticked in reverse, smooth and steady. I pulled out my phone to film it, but the battery died instantly, from 76% to black. I charged it in my car and tried again. Same result. Back inside, I explored the rest of the house. Everything was symmetrical, unnervingly so. 2 armchairs. 2 candlesticks. 2 rugs. Even the wallpaper pattern mirrored itself perfectly down the middle. Upstairs, I found a single bedroom. 1 bed. 1 nightstand. 1 journal. The journal was blank, until I turned to the final page. There, in the center, written in perfect cursive. Do not stay past midnight. No date. No name. Just that one line. I should have left then. But curiosity is louder than fear sometimes. I returned the next night with a flashlight, a power bank, and a plan. I document everything, take photos, maybe even call a historian. This house was frozen in time, literally, and I wanted answers. I arrived at 10:36 p.m. The second I stepped inside, the door closed itself behind me. I didn't panic. I figured old houses settle weird. Wind, pressure, whatever. I tried the light switch. Nothing. The power was out. Only the clock still worked, ticking backward. I set up a portable lamp and sat in the armchair closest to the mantel. I stared at that clock. Tick, tick, tick. Then I noticed something. With every second that passed in reverse, I felt a little heavier. Not physically, but emotionally. Like memories I'd forgotten were being pressed back into me. Childhood embarrassments. Regrets. Things I hadn't thought about in years. It was like someone was rewinding my mind. I shook it off and went upstairs. That's when things started changing. The wallpaper had a pattern of golden vines. Now the vines were moving, growing upward in slow motion. I reached out and they stopped. The bedspread was different too. It had gone from floral to striped. The window curtains were now lace instead of linen. The house wasn't decaying. It was restoring itself. Backwards. I rushed back to the living room. The clock now read 11:34. Still ticking backward. I grabbed the journal. Flipped to the last page again. Now it read, "Do not look in the mirror." I turned slowly. There, above the fireplace, was a mirror I hadn't seen before. Oval, brass-rimmed, too clean. I walked toward it. But before I could get close, the pendulum snapped still. No ticking. Just silence. Then I heard the front door creak open. Something had entered. Not walked in. Not broken in. Just arrived. From inside. And I wasn't alone anymore. That I turned toward the hallway. Empty. The door that had just creaked open was still closed. But the air shifted. You know that feeling you get when someone walks into the room behind you, even before they say anything? That's what it was. Heavy. Charged. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone anymore. Then I heard the clock tick again, just once. But this time the pendulum didn't move. And the tick was forward. I turned and saw my reflection in the mirror. Except, it wasn't quite me. He looked like me, sure. But he was wearing a shirt I hadn't worn in a decade. A high school football jersey. My hair was shorter in the reflection. Cleaner. Like it had been during my junior year. I reached for the mirror. The reflection did not reach back. Instead it stepped forward. And just before our faces could meet, the surface of the mirror rippled. Like water. Then it cracked. A long, jagged split down the center. Behind me I heard whispering. Not words. Just sounds. Like breaths turned inside out. I grabbed the journal again. Now the last page said, "You stayed too long." I bolted for the door. But the hallway had changed. It was shorter now. The staircase had moved. The house was rearranging itself around me. I pushed through a side door and found myself in the kitchen, except now it looked like something from the 1950s. Yellowed linoleum, an icebox instead of a fridge, a rotary phone bolted to the wall, and sitting on the counter, untouched, was a black and white photograph of me, standing in the hallway, looking scared, holding this journal. I dropped it and backed away. From the front room I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. I ducked behind the counter just as the light in the hallway dimmed. Whoever was out there, they weren't walking right. Too steady, too even, like a machine stuck in a loop. Then came the whisper again, closer now, almost next to me. You're not supposed to be here yet. I ran, straight through the back door and out into the night. But it wasn't night anymore. It was morning. Yesterday morning. Same sky, same chill, same mail truck halfway down the block. I stood frozen, then turned around. The house was different, older, weeds in the yard, windows shattered. Exactly how I'd expected it to look the first time. I walked up the porch. The door was nailed shut. A single sign hung from the knob. Condemned, entry forbidden. Sealed, September 1986. That was the month my father bought the place. I checked my phone. It worked. The clock read 9:16 a.m. A minute later than when I'd first arrived yesterday. I drove home. Didn't speak to anyone. I didn't even tell my girlfriend. How do you explain this? That you lost a night? That you watched time unravel? 2 weeks later, I received a package. No return address. Inside was a vintage clock. Same model as the one on the fireplace. Its second hand ticked backward. And on the base plate, scratched in old brass, were 3 words. Still here, son. I haven't been back to Leland Street. But some nights, my kitchen clock ticks in reverse. And when it does, I hear the mirror cracking, all over again. Story 2. The family who lived in the basement before the house was built. Location, Delray, Detroit, 2020. In 2020, I bought a duplex on the edge of Delray for dirt cheap. The upstairs was gutted, the foundation cracked, but the price was too good to pass up. I figured I'd flip it. Turn the bottom floor into a rental, maybe Airbnb it for the summer. From the beginning though, the house had a strange heartbeat. I don't mean that metaphorically. At night, lying in the sleeping bag I'd unrolled during renovation, I could hear a thump-thump from beneath the floorboards. Rhythmic. Almost wet. I told myself it was the plumbing. Old pipes expanding. Then I found out there was no plumbing yet. The first real scare happened when I opened the basement. The door to it had been sealed shut with 6-inch nails and a beam of wood drilled into the frame. Not just locked, barricaded. I should have left it, but I was curious. I ripped the wood off and pried the door open. The staircase down was steep, and the air smelled like mildew and copper. When I hit the last step, my flashlight caught rows of beds. Tiny beds. Cot-sized. At least 7 of them lined up wall to wall. Each had a blanket still folded. Dusty but intact. One even had a doll resting against the pillow, its eyes scratched out. It looked like a wartime shelter. Or worse, a place someone had kept people. But there were no records of any underground living quarters. The house had been built in 1947 according to the deed. Nothing mentioned a shelter or addition. And here's the thing that still makes my hands sweat to write. The basement was older than the house. I know that sounds impossible. But the walls were made of a different brick. Hand-poured concrete. No electrical conduit. It was like it had been there before the rest of the house. And carved into one of the walls were tally marks. 63 of them. I told my buddy Lou. He worked city records. He pulled everything he could, even went back to blueprints from the 1930s. Nothing. Only explanation, he said, is someone built on top of something they weren't supposed to. That night, I slept upstairs with a hammer under my pillow. At 2:09 a.m. I heard footsteps. From the basement. Not creaks. Footsteps. Deliberate. Slow. Uneven. I crept to the door and listened. They moved around for almost 10 minutes. Then silence. The next morning, the doll was on the kitchen counter. Its face turned toward the hallway. I tried to throw it out. Stuffed it in a trash bag, took it to the curb. Next night, it was back. In the basement. On one of the beds. I told myself I was being paranoid. That maybe I'd forgotten something. That I was sleepwalking. Until the knocking started. Always 3 knocks. At random hours. From beneath the floor. No pipes. No animals. Just slow, heavy knocks. I stopped sleeping in the house after that. But the place didn't want me gone. One day Lou came by, said he had something to show me. A copy of a death certificate from 1942. Infant male. Cause of death, undetermined failure to thrive. It listed the address, 1218 1/2 South Calumet. That's the exact basement unit of my duplex. Except, that address didn't exist until 1947. We dug deeper. From an old article in a forgotten local archive, we learned that the land had once been used by a private spiritual society in the late 1800s. Some kind of fringe cult. They kept children below ground, saying the sun would steal their souls. The article said the foundation was sealed by the city. clearly not sealed well enough. That night I went back for my tools. I wanted out. But when I opened the door, the floor was covered in water. Not a flood, just enough to reflect the ceiling. And in that reflection, I saw people. 7 of them. Standing perfectly still. Not in the room. Just in the water's reflection. I dropped everything and ran. I never set foot in that house again. I sold it at a loss to a contractor out of state. No disclosures. No details. But 2 months later I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. You broke the seal. We remember. Enclosed was the doll. Still damp. Story 3. The man who painted the same face on every wall. Location. Corktown, Detroit, 2019. I used to flip houses. Mid-range fixer-uppers in neighborhoods that were turning over. It was a side hustle until one place nearly destroyed me. A 3-story Victorian in Corktown with a wraparound porch and a dead lilac bush in every planter. The house was empty when I bought it. I walked through twice, took notes, got quotes from contractors. Everything was standard: rot, mold, rats. The basement had a little water damage, but nothing unusual. The attic was oddly clean. I didn't notice the faces at first. They weren't obvious. Just faint impressions on the walls beneath the wallpaper. It started when I stripped the paint in the hallway. There, beneath the layers, was a face. A man's. Half smiling as if he knew something you didn't. His eyes were narrow, lips pursed, almost like he was about to speak. I thought it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe someone had sketched on the drywall years ago. Then I found the same face in the dining room, behind the old china cabinet, smiling again, just slightly, and another in the master bedroom. Always the same man, same expression, different sizes, different angles, but it was him. Every time. I started taking pictures and posting them on a renovation forum. People thought it was cool, creepy but artistic. One user asked if it might be a spirit portrait, whatever that meant. Another said I should call a preservationist, but I was more concerned with getting the place painted and listed. Still, the faces unsettled me, especially when I found one behind the bathroom mirror. It hadn't been painted over. It had been scratched into the plaster. Same smile. Same man. That night I had my first dream. I was in the house, but everything was slightly wrong. The walls were wet. The stairs leaned inward, and every mirror showed his face. I woke up gasping, my sheets soaked through. I took a few days off, cleared my head. But when I came back, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The face on the 3rd floor was smiling wider now. It wasn't my imagination. I had photos. I compared them side by side. The smile had grown. The eyes were more open. I thought maybe someone was messing with me, a neighbor, a squat tenant I hadn't noticed. I installed cameras. 2 nights later, I caught movement in the upstairs hallway. A figure stepped into view just at the edge of the frame, wearing old-fashioned painter's overalls, holding a brush. No face, just a void, like the camera couldn't catch it. When I went to check the hallway the next morning, there was a new face. This time it wasn't smiling. This one looked angry, teeth bared, eyes wide, deep gouges for cheekbones. I tore the section out with a crowbar. Behind the plaster was a layer of old canvas, nailed directly into the studs. I pulled it free and found hundreds of small paintings, all rolled into the walls. Each one had his face. Every canvas signed, M.W. 1896. I did some digging. Local archives. A few dusty books from a historical society. Turns out a man named Milton Wood lived in that house at the turn of the century. He was a portraitist, obsessed with capturing eternal expressions. He went mad. Died in the house after refusing to stop painting. They found every room filled with canvases. His body had been discovered curled around a self-portrait, a smile carved into his own cheek. I stopped work immediately. Tried to sell the house, but the word got out. Neighbors whispered. No one would touch it, so I boarded it up. Months passed. I thought I was done with it. Until the night I found a painting propped against my front door. Wrapped in butcher paper. It was me, staring straight ahead. My own mouth, just beginning to smile. In the corner. M.W. 2020. Story 4. The Renters Who Vanished Between Leases. Location, Highland Park, Detroit, 2016. Back in 2016, I managed a small property portfolio in Highland Park, a tough but tight-knit neighborhood. One of the buildings I oversaw was an old brick triplex near Brush Street. Beautiful bones. Crown molding, big bay windows, tall ceilings. Unit 3 on the top floor was always a problem. The rent was cheap, the space was clean, but no one stayed longer than a few months. Some moved out in the middle of the night. One left their mattress and clothes behind. Another never even came back for the deposit. At first I thought it was crime or noise, but the neighbors were quiet and the building was secure. Then one day I received a call from a guy named Darren who wanted to see Unit 3. He was polite, clean credit, recently divorced, just wanted a quiet space. I warned him that tenants never stayed long in that unit. He laughed it off. What, ghosts or something? I signed the lease. 3 weeks in, I called to check on him. No answer. Texts read, but no reply. A month later, I stopped by. The door was locked from the inside. I knocked for 10 minutes. Then I used my key. The apartment was empty. Everything was still there. Clothes in the closet, groceries in the fridge, TV still mounted. It looked like he'd just gone for a walk and never came back. But here's the part that really threw me. His phone was on the nightstand. Still charged. Still unlocked. And in the photo app was a single video, about 15 seconds long. Just static at first. Then a whisper. I'm still here. But I'm wrong. And then, frame by frame, Darren's face flickered across the screen. But each time it appeared, it was more distorted. The last frame showed him smiling with no eyes. I backed out of the unit and called the police. They filed a report but didn't find any evidence of foul play. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. No financial motive. No body. They ruled it a voluntary disappearance. That was the 5th tenant in 2 years who just vanished from Unit 3. So I stopped leasing it. Ordered it shut. But sometimes late at night I'd drive by to check on the building. And more than once I'd see the lights on in the 3rd floor unit. Even though the breakers had been pulled. Eventually, a woman named Tasha, who lived in Unit 1, told me something that still gives me chills. She said she could hear footsteps above her some nights. Pacing. Always between 2 and 3 a.m. heavy steps. Then lighter ones. Then silence. I asked if she was sure. She nodded. But that's not the worst part, she added. Sometimes, I hear someone knocking from inside the floor. Like they're stuck under it. I offered to move her, reduce rent, anything. She refused. That building had history, she said. It used to be a boarding house in the 40s. Then a reform home for juvenile boys. Then abandoned until 1992. She showed me a newspaper clipping she kept. Yellowed and brittle. It talked about a disappearance in that very apartment during the 1950s. A boy named Thomas, age 12, vanished without a trace from his bed. His roommate said Thomas was talking to the ceiling the night before. And on the wall above his bed, they found one sentence written in chalk. I'm still here. I tore the unit apart. Pulled up the floorboards. Knocked on every wall. That's when I found the crawl space. Hidden behind a false panel near the bedroom closet. It led to a tiny hollow between the walls. Not even 5 feet tall. No lights. Inside were scratch marks. Dozens of them. And initials. Etched into the wood. Dim. DB. C. 5 sets total. No last names. No dates. But all the names matched missing persons reports tied to the building going back decades. I sealed the panel shut. I tried to forget. But a few months later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of the hallway in Unit 3. At the end of it, a figure stood. Not blurry. Not faint. Crisp and clear. It was Darren. Smiling. With no eyes. Story 5. The window that only faced the past. Location: Old Pole Town, Detroit, 2023. I took a job as a temp night watchman at an abandoned boarding house on Farnsworth Street in 2023. It was supposed to be a 2-week gig. Just make rounds, log entries, call in if anything looked broken or suspicious. The place was set for demolition in the fall. They said it used to be a boarding home for auto workers in the 50s, then sat empty for decades. Local teens had broken in a few times. Kids said it was haunted. No surprise, half the homes on the block were empty or burned out. The place was 3 stories. Dead quiet. No power upstairs, just emergency lights downstairs. I had to use a flashlight after sunset. The building creaked constantly, but I figured that was normal for a place that old. Until I reached the 3rd floor. There was a window at the end of the hallway. A tall, curved glass thing framed in dusty red curtains. But what I saw through it wasn't the street. Not the crumbling sidewalk. Not the potholes and dead trees. Through that window I saw a sunlit boulevard. Green trees. Bright storefronts. Classic cars parked along the curb. A little girl on a pink bicycle riding past with her pigtails bouncing. It looked like a movie set. I rubbed the glass. Wiped it clean. Even leaned out one of the side windows to check if I was just seeing a reflection or something. No. The rest of the block was dead. But through that window, it was 1954. I came back the next night, and it was different again. Same boulevard. Same era. But now it was dusk. A man in a suit leaned against a light post, smoking. A couple argued near the curb. A dog trotted past, tail wagging. It was like the window showed a living moment, always in motion. Always changing. But always the past. Every night after that, I visited the window. It became an obsession. One night, I saw a man being chased. He ran barefoot across the street and ducked into a doorway. 2 other figures followed, one holding something long and sharp. The next night, the man was gone, but blood was smeared across the glass of a nearby store. It never repeated. Each viewing was new. I started taking notes, descriptions, times. I even asked an archivist downtown if the window might be showing real historical footage, some old camera trick. But they looked at me like I was nuts. so I stopped telling people. Until one night I recognized someone. A woman in a long yellow dress. My grandmother. Not just someone who looked like her. Same scarf. Same laugh. She walked arm in arm with my grandfather who died when I was 4. I stood there frozen. Then she looked up. Right at me. And for the first time, someone on the other side of the glass stopped moving. She stared for a full 10 seconds. Then her face changed. Her mouth opened. And she mouthed a word I couldn't hear, but it looked like, "Run." That was the first night I didn't sleep. The next shift I went back, but I stayed across the hall. I didn't want to get close to the window. Still I had to look. This time the street was empty. No people. No cars. No trees. Just fog. Thick and unmoving. Then something walked into frame. Not a person. Something taller. And too thin. Its arms hung down to its knees. Its head scraped the top of the awning. And it turned slowly, facing the glass. Facing me. Its mouth opened. But instead of sound, the window cracked. I ran. Called the company. Quit the job. Left my badge in the mailbox. But a week later, I passed the building one last time before demolition. And the window, that same window, was still intact. Despite everything else being gutted. I parked across the street. Just watched it. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the curtain shifted. And in the glass, I saw myself, looking out from the inside, smiling. But I wasn't smiling in real life. The reflection lifted its hand, pressed it against the inside of the glass, and mouthed, "You're next." That night, I covered every mirror in my house. Because now, my reflection blinks just a second too late.